Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Post-Pandemic Mental Health at Work. Thanks to those who have already joined us. We will get started shortly, but we'll just give it a few more moments for everybody to join. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to everyone who just joined us in the last minute or so. We will make a start with some housekeeping before we get into the webinar. First, just to note, this is a listen-only webinar that is being recorded. So you won't be able to interact with us vocally and verbally, but we do want it to be an interactive session, so we do welcome your questions via the Q&A chat function. We will be aiming to answer live questions at the end of the webinar. Please do use the Q&A function to post your questions. You don't need to wait to the end of the webinar. Please go ahead and post them as we go along. If we can, we might pick up some as we go through. And also, if you have any technical difficulties, please also use the Q&A function to note that, and someone from our team will try and help you as soon as possible. Lastly, there will be a survey that follows this webinar, and we do really welcome your feedback. So please do let us know what you thought, how we can improve this and make it even better for next time. And after completing that survey, you will get access to the slides as well as access to the recording. So we can make a start. We have a really good lineup of panelists today that I'm very excited to introduce you to. So I will ask everyone to turn on their cameras for us now. And while they're doing that, I will start by introducing myself. My name is Lockie Humphreys. I am the committee manager to HS1. That is BSI's National Committee for Occupational Health and Safety Management. So we look after the national input to the ISO 45000 series, which I'm sure many on this call will be aware of, and which we are going to be getting into a little bit today. So I will go through our panelists as they appear on my screen and just ask them to introduce themselves. So first for me is Sally. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Lucky. I'm Sally Swindwood. I'm the committee manager for the ISO Technical Committee for Occupational Health and Safety, ISO TC 283, and have been involved in the development of 45001 and all of the standards in this series. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Sally. And Aditya, please.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Aditya Jain. I am a professor of sustainable work and development at Nottingham University Business School. And I have been involved in the development of ISO 45003. I work very closely with Sally and colleagues from around the world in that. But I would say it's been a journey that started in 2008 when we started work on the development of PAS 1010 with BSI. And of course, that sort of culminated with the development of ISO 45003. Of course, we worked with an international team, but I chaired the UK Mirror Committee on that work. So nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Aditya. And lastly, Nick.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nick Wilson. I am a public speaker and champion of mental health, suicide prevention and disability. I've provided mental health training to numerous companies over the years, and I also have lived experience of having PTSD and depression.
Okay, if we could move on to the next slide. Thank you very much to all our panelists. for being with us today. We have run a full program of webinars today. This is the third of 3 sessions, and as we know, it's on returning to work post-pandemic and mental health. It's a very interesting and a very important topic. This webinar will function more as a panel discussion in style, so we will get into some discussion questions and have a chance to hear a lot from each of our panelists, who I know have lots of insights and thoughts that they're ready to share. But before we do that, I did just want to set the scene briefly on the way we're going to kind of frame this conversation. And the first thing I wanted to acknowledge is, although we've called this session post-pandemic mental health at work, we're not necessarily post-pandemic right now. So many of us around the world are still dealing with the pandemic itself, as well as various and changing ripple effects of it. So I guess we can think of post-pandemic in a few different ways around the world, and including in the UK here, where we're post-lockdown, certainly. We're dealing with this phrase, the new normal, and going back to work. And we can also think about post-pandemic as kind of a way to look towards the future. So mental health at work 5, 10, 15 years down the line. So if we just go on to the next slide, please. I think it's also important to acknowledge that it's really people that are at the heart of organizational success. And I've just noted there for context that we are dealing with a post-pandemic, or the pandemic itself, but it's not just pandemic that we have to think about. So this year, certainly, and in the last couple of years, we've also seen economic instability, which has led to things like job insecurity. A lot of people are dealing with loss of income. Organizations are adapting, they're finding new ways of working, restructuring. And some of these disruptions to work has also highlighted other things that contribute to kind of a challenging landscape, I suppose. So widespread inequality that's been highlighted, and I guess governments and organizations are being challenged more and more on some of these discrepancies, and being pushed to act on some of these things. If we just go to the next slide. In the context of all that, I think we can kind of agree that in the last few years, both organizational and worker needs and expectations have changed. So certainly our routines have changed, but also the nature of work has kind of radically shifted. We're using more and different technologies. Trust between employers and employees has changed, and what we expect from going to work has changed. So with all of that in mind, and I know we don't want to hear from me for the entire session, so I will get into the discussion panel questions. So the first question here is really to start off quite broadly. And I'll go to Nick first to kind of introduce us to this with some thoughts on why is supporting mental health at work so important?
Thanks for that. So for this one, I've gone straight to the one that will probably really get business owners thinking, and that's money. Now, pre-pandemic, we were looking around £105 billion a year was the cost of mental ill health to the UK economy. And when I was doing some research ready for this, I found a report by Mental Health Foundation and the London School of Economics that came out, I think it was March this year, and that estimated it to now be £118 billion a year, the cost to the UK economy. So aside from anything else, take the emotions, take all the rest of what's right to do out of it, it's a sound business decision financially to be looking into this and putting your time into it. And then again, if you look at your people, you know, I was in the army for 14 years. I've led subordinates. I've been on the battlefield with subordinates under me, so I get management and leadership. And if you really want your staff individuals to be as productive as possible, you need them in the best possible shape. And this whole idea of personal problems, you know, leave them at home, and when you come into work, it's just about work, and it just doesn't happen. You know, it doesn't work like that. We spend so much time in the workplace that it comes in with us. It's just human nature of who we are. You can't change science. And so we do bring these issues into the workplace. And if you're then in the workplace for so long trying to hide all these kind of things, then again, science, it just comes to the fact that we cannot do this as human beings. And so it starts slowly to take its toll on us, and it starts building up and building up. And that's where you start seeing a lot of burnout happen, because people are trying to keep up with work, trying to keep up with any problems they've got at home. And as we've seen over the past 2-3 years now, even take away the problems that people were having pre-pandemic, you've then got 2 years of COVID, you've then got the war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis and all these things that have been building up. We're now into kind of year 3, yeah, where it's not so much about the pandemic. It's still floating around. People are still a little bit wary of it, and it's been going on consistently for 3 years. You know, we can only put up with so much stress before it really starts impacting that. So again, to not address that and to not have things in place and not support your staff, then that is going to be that they're not going to be as productive. Things aren't going to be as effective. And also in a world where we expect more of ourselves, don't we? Technology is growing so fast. It's almost a 24-hour-a-day workplace, especially when you look into the finance sector and trying to keep up in different time zones. We're trying to keep up with technology that can work 24 hours a day, and you're trying to push people, human beings, to the limit, which just isn't possible. And I found it really interesting to see this past week, the 4-day week trial that happened was actually deemed to be a success because of the results from that, which was really interesting. And just thing that I want to kind of say as well is I've heard this a lot from the talks that I've done over the past year or so, and speaking to some of my clients and businesses, and they speak a lot about returning to normal. We never return to normal. Every day we learn new things and we move on. So there's no returning to normal. It's about identifying our new normal and learning from all the lessons that we've had over the past 2-3 years. What have we learned from that? What can we do? What can't we do? And then implementing them so we create a new normal that works best and is most efficient and productive for the workplace while supporting the staff.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Nick. It was a really comprehensive answer, and touch on a few things that we're certainly going to come back to in a moment. But before we do that, I'll bring in Aditya now on this question, perhaps focusing a little bit more on this phrase return to normal, which Nick kind of started to pick up on. But obviously we have some people going back to previous ways of working, some people have new ways of working. Could you talk a little bit about the effects of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd like to start with what Nick was saying about sort of the normal. I think the what is normal has always differed for individuals, even before the pandemic. So what we call new ways of working now, which have become more dominant, so hybrid work, for instance, is not new. It's already been happening for a while now. I mean, technology which enables things like this webinar have been used, and people have been working remotely for a long time in a hybrid context. It's just that it become much more common for it to be because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns and so on. I think what it is important, I think, in terms of as we get used to this rapid change, I think what's important to sort of keep in mind is the rapid change that organizations have had to deal with, people have had to deal with, so going back to the previous one, a previous question about sort of why is supporting mental health more important? It's more important now, and how we adjust to the new normal is by making sure that we understand what's affecting people. So again, going back to what Nick said at the starting point, I think understanding what people are going through, we can't simply ignore what's happening with people, whether it's at work or whether it's outside of work, because the impact of that will happen. And it's just a lot of things that people are dealing with. So the risk of not understanding or not talking to people about what's affecting them is going to affect how people are going to deal with the new normal. So I think organizations have a huge responsibility here, and it varies hugely. I mean, what we find from the evidence so far is that it's affecting different people in very different ways, and organizations have to take a systematic approach to dealing with and adjusting to the new reality in many ways.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Aditya. And I want to bring Sally in on this as well, but could we also go to the next slide? As we have some statistics here that I think fit in nicely with what we were just saying. So Aditya, you just mentioned that a lot of this stuff is not necessarily new, and there is also, there's always been different approaches to what normal is for different workers. So the statistics on this page here, the first two actually relate to pre-pandemic numbers, while the last quote there specifically is about a response to the pandemic. And I think, Nick, you mentioned a UK figure, which was, I think, £118 million. So definitely very thought-provoking there. But Sally, do you want to pick up on this and add anything to this kind of broad question on why mental health is so important?
Yeah, thank you, Lockie. As Nick and Aditya have said, it's always been important. It's been costing our economy millions and millions of pounds for years, and that's been getting worse year on year on year since well before the pandemic. So if we throw in the effects of the pandemic as well, you can only imagine how much more the costs are going up and how much more it is affecting people. People are going off on long-term sick leave because of it. A lot of them won't come back to work. They aren't capable of doing it anymore. And it's, we really do have to stop thinking this as a short-term crisis. This is a long-term, really serious health issue, much more impactful than other areas of occupational health and safety overall. It's leaning to more people being off work for longer periods of work, people leaving professions entirely because of the burnout that Nick was talking about, just going, I can't do it anymore, I don't want to do it anymore. And I think there's still a bit of an attitude going on in some organisations, some aspects of society, that we'll be over this soon and everybody will be okay, but not everybody bounces back. It's, everything has been exacerbated. We've all been carrying trauma for the last few years. If you already suffered from depression and anxiety, you know that that's going to be worse. Now, it has been worse. We've seen it in people we know and love. And that has a very long tail, because that collective trauma is impacting on all the people around those people as well. So their stress levels are increasing, their health overall is decreasing whilst they try and hold it all together. So this, whatever we do in the workplace to make our organisations more resilient, we've got to remember it's not about personal resilience, and we've got to understand that this is a big picture issue. We're still going to be dealing with it in a decade. It's not going to have gone away. So let's start thinking about real organisational changes and stop thinking about individuals and assuming they'll be all right by the summer, because they won't.
Thank you very much, Sally. And you very nicely led into the next discussion question. So we'll go over to that now on the next slide. So while we are looking at this topic from an kind of an organisational point of view and what the organisation can do, we're obviously looking at how that response can benefit both the organisation and the individual. So if we think about the organisational benefits for a moment, and I'll go to Nick first again. You mentioned in your first answer, Nick, things like the 4-day work week have been trialled with some success. So what do you think is in it for businesses, essentially? What positive outcomes can an organisation expect to have?
Well, look, you know, it's, I think, just to go back to the costs again, you know, the big costs that we're talking about there. One of the stats that wasn't in there, I was trying to remember what it's called. I'm hoping you're going to help me out here, Aditya. It's I still can't remember the word. When someone's at work physically, but their head's not there.
Presenteeism.
Presenteeism. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing was, above all of that, is presenteeism. So it's easier to be able to tell when people are off work. But I think the HSC was saying the biggest costs were presenteeism pre-pandemic. So again, if that was pre-pandemic, you can only imagine where it's at now. And so whilst you might, I would say to organisations, don't just look at how many people you got off, but you also need to be looking at the people who are actually there and trying to work out whether presenteeism is a big issue for you, because it certainly was pre-pandemic. So the cost is obviously, it's businesses. They're not a charity. They're there to make money, and so these ever rising costs. More and more people signed up for 3 months, 6 months plus, with full pay, etc. All these things cost a lot of money. And for a business to look at the bigger picture, you know, an individual can only do so much themselves. I'm a big believer that it's not just all down to businesses. It's also down to us as individuals. We need to take ownership and accept responsibility for our own well-being. You know, there are things that we can do more of. We can be more proactive, you know, and there's things that we can do. But even when you provide all the training, going back to one of my old clients, I provided a load of mental health training to the individuals, and it was great. Thought everything was in place. I came away. 2 months later, I had some of the staff coming back to me, and basically they couldn't implement any of the training because the workplace culture was still toxic. They were still getting interference by managers, and because they hadn't done that whole bigger picture and looking at the culture and looking at all their policies and procedures, etc., they simply weren't able to implement and be anywhere near as effective as what they could have done when you start looking at bottom up, top down, the organizational structure and culture. So I would say, you know, it's really important that you take a step back, that you look at the big elements, you know, and really look to engage with your staff, earn their trust. We talk about equality and inclusion. Within workplaces, that is obviously EDI is massive, but also including people in your decisions around mental health. Listen to hear what they've got to say, you know, those on the shop floor, as it were. You know, what have they got to say? What would they like to see? What problems have they got? And hear from all the different sectors, all the different departments, because they're all valid issues. And I know there was another stat where a lot of managers assumed they had fixed things by putting things in place they thought they needed to do. It was a bit of a one fix, you know, one thing for everything. And it doesn't work like that. What works for one business might not work for another. Different sectors, different industries, different businesses with different values, different goals and different aims. So don't try and go for the one-stop shop, because it doesn't work. It's really got to fit within your culture. And I just think back to the army days, really, of what we managed to achieve with very little money, not the best of kit, but you had a team who fully trusted and respected one another and had their person's back. You know, even if you didn't like them, you still looked after that person. If you could get even, you know, a third of that mentality and that trust and that support network within the workplace, then that would help so many people, and it would literally change the face. But it has to come from top to bottom, bottom to top, and be non-hierarchical, and you'll see a massive change in the staff and how willing they are to do that little bit more for you because they see what you are doing for them.
Thanks very much, Nick. Some really, really good points raised there. If we could go on to the next slide. And Nick has kind of introduced most of these points already, actually, but as we know, there's tangible business reasons for focusing on mental health in the workplace. And one that Nick, you just started kind of giving an example of there was doing that kind of culture training and mental health awareness training at the individual level is well and good until you run into implementation issues. So if it's not able to be implemented at that higher organizational level, it's obviously not having the effect that was intended. So Aditya, I wonder if you could explain a little bit about what we mean when we say organizational resilience compared to personal resilience.
So I think, yeah, I think often, as Nick said, the focus tends to be on sort of fixing the individual in a way, to so to say. So we'll invest, organizations will invest in things like stress management training. So you improve coping skills. Basically, people can tolerate challenges more effectively, which is all useful, of course. But if you don't deal with issues at source, so for example, if there's a challenge in terms of the interpersonal relations at work, so there's a toxic environment, or the organizational culture is poor, or there's poor communication, or there's high workload, which, so when we say high workload doesn't mean that you sort of reduce workload. It's about how you manage workload more effectively. You might distribute it better. You might give people more autonomy to identify ways in which they could manage their existing workload better, because sometimes just simple allowing people, which we have seen during the pandemic. I think one of the good things about the pandemic is organizations have got more used to letting people be more flexible in terms of how they actually work. So addressing issues at source, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but I think it's shifting from the focus of the individual to say we'll make the individual stronger and better able to cope with the challenges that they face, rather than fixing the problems at source. And we need to take a holistic approach. So that's where we move from the individual resilience to organizational or business resilience. And business resilience in many ways is sustainability. How do you make the organization more sustainable, which is very closely related to how do you make the organization more profitable. So it goes back to the business case. So when you look at the whole sustainability agenda, unfortunately, the focus has almost always been on the environment. The sustainability, the environment is just one dimension. There are three dimensions to sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course are a broad level framework, there is a huge social dimension, and promoting or supporting mental health at work and well-being are part of the social dimension. Of course, they interact with the economic dimension, as we said about the business case, and they interact with the environmental dimension as well to cope with the changes that are coming. I mean, if you think about what one of the biggest threats to organizations today is climate change, and how organizations cope with that, and then of course how that affects the labor market and so on and so forth. So dealing with focusing on business resilience in a holistic manner allows organizations to be more sustainable, and that basically means dealing with potential sources. So basically forecasting, identifying potential challenges that might come in the future which will affect people, and also sort of planning ahead rather than just saying. So mental health, promoting or supporting mental health at work basically means identifying issues ahead of time, so you're able to provide people with the right support and use your resources in a better way and a more effective way, and intervening here. So to have business resilience, you intervene at all levels, not just at the individual level, but on the organizational level, and of course take into account the external challenges as well.
Thank you very much, Aditya. And I want to go to Sally now as well to kind of build on some of these points that we've started on, or perhaps highlight some of the ones we haven't talked about in as much detail. So Sally, do you want to speak a little bit about possibly reputational risk and some of the other things that businesses can expect to see?
Sure, thank you, Lockie. And I want to build on that point Aditya was making then about sustainability. Sustainability is going to be more and more and more important as time goes on. That means for investors, for customers, and for your staff. So looking after people as human beings, recognizing they are at the heart of everything you do, and whether you are successful or not, is a key part of that sustainability package. And increasingly, nobody's going to support an organization that doesn't. We are really seeing a shift already in terms of employees who are just going, no, I'm not doing it anymore. I've shifted my views on work-life balance. I've realized that my friends and my family and my life outside of work really matters. So I'm not going to kill myself for work. So an organization that recognizes that in their human beings that they work with and treats them as human beings and recognizes that their family and friends are important, and sometimes they need to prioritize them and not work, they're going to be more inclined to work for that organization. They're going to stay at that organization. They're going to be more loyal to that organization. But conversely, if you go back to that, we will exploit you till you fall over, then just get some new humans in, as if you're just a desk. Word of mouth is very strong. Social media is very powerful. You will very soon find that you can't recruit good candidates. You can recruit poor candidates that can't get a job somewhere else, but not the good ones, because they're not going to come to you if they hear that that's how you treat people. And it's going to go all the way down to your customers. They're not going to buy from you if you are treating people badly. So this looking after mental health, it has huge ripples for your reputation. That's really, really important. So that's both ethics and profit, basically. It's both sides of the coin. And now we're getting more and more legal requirements coming in. There are more legal requirements around mental health coming into the UK. The HSE has assured me they are not afraid of prosecuting anymore on matters of psychological health. And this is a shift. They didn't used to. It used to be much softer, and it's getting much harder because they recognise how important it is to actually go, no, this is the minimum standard you have to achieve. And remember, the regulation is the minimum standard, and recognise that if you do the good things that everybody's been talking about, you'll get far more out of it than legal compliance. You get a happy, healthy, productive workforce. You've got better chance of your organisation lasting. You're going to have a better reputation. You're going to be able to deal with all the challenges that are being thrown at us right now much, much better if you're looking after those people. So climate change, it's making particularly our younger generation of workers incredibly anxious. They're having existential crisis about, well, what's the point of having a career? We're not going to have a planet, why would I bother? So, these are things that are just going to disappear overnight. Even if the pandemic just vanishes, we've still got all this other stuff to do. So it's just really important that everybody sees the big picture, to look after their reputational risk as much as anything else, and to make sure they are still in business in 5-10 years' time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that answer, Sally. Aditya, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I think in terms of the legal requirements, I just want to add to what Sally said, because I think it's important for organizations to recognize that the legal requirements have been there, and as Sally said, they've not necessarily been so regulators have not necessarily prosecuted as much on it, because it's been one of those areas where evidence hasn't been good enough in many ways, but because the scale of the problem is becoming so large, regulators have no choice almost but to take a more proactive stance in terms of regulating the law around, so the Health and Safety Act and then the 1999 regulations are in a way require the employer to take into account risk to individuals, so psychosocial risk, which we'll talk about later. But in Europe now, of course, that doesn't necessarily apply here, but just to give you a general sort of overview of what's happening in the world. In Europe, they are looking at specific regulation in this area. So this is becoming a priority, and so when we talk about why deal with mental health at work or why address it, it's a three-pronged case approach. So it's the business case, which is of course immediate to employers, is the ethical case, the values that Sally highlighted, and the legal case. It's all three that go hand in hand. Laws are always minimum, is the baseline in many ways, and it's through the business and the value case that you go above and beyond what law requires. And in most cases around mental health, you should go as much as you can above law.
Thank you very much, Aditya. And I think starting to talk about legal requirements and regulation is a very good point to also talk about standardization, which is the next slide that we have up. So very well led in there, Aditya. So I am in a moment going to hand over to Sally to just speak in a little bit more detail about the content of this standard. But ISO 45003, it is part of the ISO 45000 family of standards. Hopefully a lot of people on the webinar today are already aware of it. You might even be using it already. But for those that aren't, it is the first global standard that gives guidance on managing psychological health in the workplace. So it gives a framework on managing psychological health and safety. So if we go on to the next slide, I will let Sally give a quick overview of what you can expect from that document.
Thanks, Lockie. And I'm going to start with the real basics here. This is a practical document. It's a practical document written in easy to understand language. You do not need to be a psychologist to understand it. Anybody can understand it at any level in the organisation. And I, for one, I think Aditya will be with me on this. I would encourage everybody to read it. It's free to read on the ISO website. And the more all of us educate ourselves, raise our own awareness, the more we can all play into building positive, healthy cultures in our workplaces. We can help ourselves, we can help our peers. So that's the first point I want to make, and that it is suitable for all types of organisations. It doesn't matter whether you're running a mining outfit or a shoe shop. These are human beings we are talking about, and although the factors might be slightly different, the triggers might be different that you're dealing with, people aren't actually that different. We've got some core responses to things. When we get stressed, we behave in a certain way. Certain things are more likely to make our stress levels go up than others. Some things are going to make us more depressed than others. Isolation, for example, as Aditya said, unmanageable workloads or lack of autonomy. It doesn't matter what industry you work in, they are going to affect your mental health and your well-being, and your well-being is fundamental. So it gives examples of these risks and where the psychosocial hazards are, where they can arise from, and they won't all arise in every organisation or in every job role, but it gives you that whole range so you can read through it and go, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or oh yeah, that does seem like something we might be able to do better on. What it also does in this document is gives you examples of signs and symptoms, things to look out for. You may not realise you have an issue in your organisation or in your team, in your department, but if you educate yourself better on the kind of ways it can manifest itself, that will really, really help you understand what kind of culture you've got going, whether individuals or whole groups of people are suffering from mental ill health at the moment, or their well-being has been undermined. So 45003 can really help with all of this. And I think it's really important to note that you don't have to use it with ISO 45001. It works with it, it's written to complement it, and so give you a way of embedding your management of psychological health in your overall health and safety management system. That is ideal. That is how it should be done. But if you don't have a management system, it's still really useful. Don't be put off it because it's got a 45 number.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think, as Sally said, one of the real strengths of this document is the examples in it, and it really can help with raising awareness within organisations of the kind of things that we can be looking for. So if we just go to the next slide, we have got some more detail on exactly that, the psychosocial hazards. So I'll just give everybody a moment to kind of take that in. There is a lot of information on this slide, but I think just to echo what Sally said, these kind of tables are really helpful in giving those examples that maybe you hadn't thought of yet. So I'm sure as we look at this, there are some that jump out immediately as being something that you would consider, but equally there are things on here that maybe weren't as obvious. So I want to open it out again now to Nick and Aditya. We might go Nick first. Are there anything on here that you would kind of highlight in particular, or maybe would like to give an example to?
I was hoping you're going to go to Aditya first. I would say a big one at the moment, it possibly come under workplace environment, I suppose, would be change, and just how unsettling change can be. And with people who you know, change is happening in life a lot, isn't it, in all kinds of various ways. And when we're looking at kind of pressures on, if your business is going through a number of changes at the moment, just be very aware that that can be very unsettling for people. And the other one I would get would also come from a disability viewpoint, for both physically and mentally, because mental illness is classed as a disability. But those who've got disabilities, physical or mental, you know, that they have experienced a massive traumatic time. The pressure it puts on top recently would be one. So it's worth having it, if you've got disabled people working, you just have a chat, see how they're getting on, and see if there's any ways that you can assist them in any way. So yeah, I think with change and maybe those equality and inclusion elements for me.
Thanks very much, Nick. And Aditya, what about you?
I mean, I think they're all important, aren't they? I think so. I think what I think I'd like to highlight two key things here. I think the first is that how work is organized, the social factors and work and the work environment and equipment and so on interact with each other very closely. So if you think about hybrid work as an example, so remote work in isolation, as you see in table 1, so basically that's how work is organized. So when we think about the pandemic and sort of go back to the question on returning to new normal, so if in some ways for a lot of people hybrid work is becoming the norm now, so that might involve working remotely, so working from home, working without a lot of interaction, which raises sort of or exposes them to certain hazards. So for example, isolation could be one of them. That might affect their work-life balance to some way, because it's not as easy to switch on or off when you're working from home. And that, of course, can be further impacted by inadequate equipment or unreliable Wi-Fi. We've all been dealing with these issues, and that's why we do all these tests when we have things like webinars, for example. So I think it's important to recognize, and similarly, several different aspects will interact with each other. And I think that's why you need to assess them appropriately. And I think what's also important to recognize is not to see just all of this just as a negative, how all of this affects people negatively in terms of how all of this can affect them in terms of stress or raising anxiety and so on. I think what's also important to recognize is that a lot of these aspects, especially the bits in the table in bold, can also be very positive. So for example, if you have role clarity instead of role ambiguity, if you have if you are working from home can also be, going back to my example on hybrid work. Hybrid work can be also very fulfilling and very positive if people are involved in that decision making, if they have some autonomy in terms of how that hybrid work is actually implemented. So there are many ways in which the aspects of psychosocial hazards which come from our work environment and our employment conditions and so on will affect people negatively. But if managed well, they can also have a huge positive impact. So they can lead to enhanced engagement, so improved work engagement, improved innovation, improved productivity, as Nick said. So it's how you manage these factors is what really the standard is about in many ways.
Can I just come in there as well?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just you brought up a great point there, Aditya, which is, you know, all of this can seem quite negative. And I know I had a lot of corporate clients who were very wary of opening up a can of worms by doing all this kind of stuff. But I just want to highlight to you all that even if you get someone who's got poor mental ill health, or they have a diagnosable mental illness, that doesn't mean that they can't work. You know, I've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, but yet I still run a successful public speaking business and the other bits and pieces that I do. It's very much about, because I've worked out how to manage things. And I think Aditya said it a bit earlier on about understanding, so self-awareness and self-knowledge, really understanding what the root kind of problems, where they come from, of which all this ISO will help you with. So it's not about finding out those who are struggling just so we can kind of put them in the right place, but with the right support. There's no reason why they all have to suddenly be off work. You can have someone with bipolar disorder, you can have someone with borderline personality disorder or a depression still working for you and being very productive, really good. They've got loads of skills and assets. So don't overly be concerned about mental illness suddenly mean you're paying someone for 6 months while they go off sick. In some cases, it doesn't actually help for people to be off sick full time. So just kind of wanted to follow on a bit from what Aditya said there.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think that's a really important point to make. And I also, to go back to Aditya's point, especially the example on remote working and isolation, which actually answered one of the questions that we've had come in, which was around if workers are resistant to returning to the office, or perhaps they're a bit slower to return to the office, does that have necessarily a detrimental effect? So I think Aditya did a very good job of outlining the things to consider in that situation, and that it is more about managing it than whether you need to do this, or this. So just to bring Sally in on this as well, are there any particular examples that you'd like to kind of pull out here?
Yes, yes, yes. As soon as they start talking, there's so many examples. But one of the things I would like to talk about, and it kind of fits with what you were just saying about people kind of being forced back to the office or that kind of thing, is one of the things we talked about a lot in developing 45003, and it is in the standard, is about adapting work to the worker instead of the worker to work. Now, if you do have depression, for example, chronic depression, you've had it for years, like I have, like Nick has, you know, there's a lot of us about. If you work to our strengths, we can be the best employees in the world for you. But if you try and force us into the wrong shaped role, then it's not going to work out so well. So I think this is something, it's really not that hard for organisations to do, is actually look at the strengths and weaknesses of individuals and say, where can you bring most value to the organisation? And then you're going to have much happier people working for you. And they're really going to appreciate the fact that you took the time also to find out about them, find out what worked. If you're a real introvert, you probably don't want to be on this panel. You don't want to be forced onto this panel anyway. You might be happy to talk about something you know very well, but you're going to be more comfortable with it if you're slightly more extroverted and well prepared, potentially. So it's about just, don't see workers as one homogenous mass. And here's the problem ones over here, the disabled ones, the sick ones, the people who've been off sick or complain that they've got too much work. They're not problems, it's just a puzzle that needs putting together in a better shape. And then you will have a much more productive workforce. So it's not all negative, because everybody can bring good stuff to your organisation. But it is about actually just keeping an eye out and going, yeah, no, that person doesn't do that well in that particular task, that activity, that role. Perhaps we can shift them to the side so that they're better at.
Thank you very much for that, Sally. A very well made point. Nick thinks so too. I also just acknowledge we have some really good questions coming in at the moment, and we will try to get to as many as possible at the end of the session. But just building on what we've said, if we go on to the next slide, please, we've got a list here of signs and symptoms to look out for. So I guess we were starting to get into it there with some of the things that Nick and Sally raised, but this, I think, is another strength of the 45,003 document, is that it does, for people who are not experts in this area or don't have an expert in the workplace, this document can be really helpful in raising awareness of the things that we could be looking out for. So I might go back to Aditya on what kind of behavioural changes can maybe indicate there's a problem. Are there any particular examples you'd like to pull out?
I think the slide is quite illustrative in many ways, and I think the way I would ask people to think about this is, probably a lot of us have experienced this ourselves. I think at various points in our working lives. I think changes in how we would usually behave is a good sign. And I think withdrawal when we have low. So if you're going through a lot at work, whether it's because of work-related reasons or whether it's because of things outside of work, I think is going to lead to the same outcome. In many ways, how you feel is not necessarily dependent on what's the cause of it. It's how you feel is how you feel. And I think withdrawal is or social isolation, is you don't want to interact with people when you're not in a great space. And that can include things like refusing offers to help because you think now everything's fine. And I think because there is often a stigma associated with mental health or mental ill health. People often say you need to rough it out, toughen up, and that's why it's so nice to hear Nick talking about this, having been in the army. I think it's so misunderstood, and it's almost sort of it's surprising where people think the toughest or the hardest jobs in some way. So the military, paramedics, or sort of or first responders, they all have incredibly hard jobs, but they'll be the first people to tell you that's important to acknowledge your own limitations and seek help as soon as you feel you need it. There is nothing macho about saying I can handle it, because you don't know. So the point from how much you can cope with it, because it's good to be able to cope with things, but the line between where to extent you can cope with it till you actually break down is very fine, and you sometimes don't know. So it's important to be aware yourselves of some of these signs, and also for your colleagues to be more aware. And I think line managers have a huge role to play here as well, rather than sort of seeing, as Sally said earlier, and Nick as well, about seeing the individual who's identifying these symptoms as being or creating problems or complaining. It should be actually seen in a more positive light, because they might lead to, you don't want, if for example you see them being absent at work more than sort of a usual, or it's not clearly understood why, or they seem to show lack of engagement, you can intervene sooner, and that will save you in the longer run in terms of what potential long-term sickness absence, high turnover, and so on. And again, of course, that will affect organizational culture and so on. So you don't want to get into a vicious cycle, which I would say a lot of organizations today are. So I think recognizing these signs and symptoms is hugely important. And again, the standard helps organizations to do that.
Thank you very much, Aditya. And I think speaking on putting interventions in place and taking the awareness of these kind of signs and symptoms and then turning that into positive action is exactly what we want to talk about in the next part of the webinar. So what can we do? Before we go into that, Nick, jump in, please.
There's no way I'm not going to speak on signs and symptoms. Not a chance. Sally, I know you were just waiting for me. So the kind of two things I wanted to say on signs and symptoms again. The first one is that they could show physical symptoms. So it could be if someone's getting a lot of headaches, migraines, they're getting neck aches, they've got a lot of tension and maybe cramps across the shoulders, upper back, neck, things like that. So kind of they can be some potential red flags, especially amongst the guys. They're more likely to show a physical issue opposed to anything else. The look for, it says changes in behavior. I've always said, because you can have signs and symptoms as long as your arm. There's so many out there, but this is a great excuse to really get to know your staff, because I always say to people, look for a change in character. I think basically it's what Aditya is saying, look for changing characteristics. If someone's usually like this, you know, and now they're not being that way, it at least ask the question, why? You know, and so instead of trying to maybe focus so much, I know some the workshops I do, they focus so much on the signs and symptoms. Get to know your staff really, really well. You'll then be able to pick up much easier when they're not quite being themselves, for whatever that presents itself, and it at least kind of begs the question. And the final bit I'd say on signs and symptoms, sometimes that's the easy bit, is recognizing that someone's not quite being themselves. The problem you get then is if someone doesn't trust you, try and get them to accept help or to accept and own up to something being wrong. That can be a whole different level. And that can be extremely challenging, especially in males. So just don't think that you've got the signs, you've recognized it in someone, and then you'll then automatically be able to follow the theory books and you're down this great path and it's all sorted. That predominantly could be when actually your biggest struggle then begins to go up, because if they don't accept the help from you and the support, then you are very limited in what you can do. I'll shut up.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that. No, I think very well worth making that point. And I think we can build on it as we go on to the next question on what can we do. So we will talk about different psychosocial risks for different individuals in a moment, but just to be a little bit more general first up, and if we go on to the next slide as well, please. So Nick, some of what you started talking about there related to building a safe and trusting culture in the workplace, I suppose, and knowing staff and knowing what to look for and being able to recognize those nuances. So up on the screen here, again, we have some tables that outline examples and things that we can look for and things that we can action. So I might go to, we'll stay with Nick to kind of build on what you just said then, but what here do you think might be some of the more important actions, or maybe they're all important, obviously, if there's a few particular examples you could pull out for us?
Yeah, I looked a lot on this. For me, probably one of the biggest ones that stands out is peer support. There is, you know, it's effectively doesn't cost anything. You know, you can do your own peer support stuff, put kind of groups in place. It's something that can happen very quickly. I've run a peer support group locally for the past 2.5 years by myself, and we've helped over 250 plus guys during that time. The sharing of lived experiences, okay, and getting people to share their stories is invaluable. The NHS, professional health services are all starting to include people with lived experience and getting them to share their story to really be able to inspire and empower others to open up a bit easier, and also to demonstrate hope that there is a way out of it, and you can show various different ways. So getting people together who have got a common problem that they're struggling in something, and then getting them to open up in fun, engaging, interactive ways. Don't just sit them in a circle and expect them to talk, because it won't happen. But you know, try to really build that up. One that I really liked doing was Amazon, and I did some work with them, and they had themed, so they didn't call it peer support groups, but they had themed groups. So they had those who like doing cocktails, you had the cyclists, you had the gardeners, all this kind of stuff, and they got together once a month and they just had a chat about what they did. And I thought that was great, and we expanded it a bit more, so now they've got some structure in there on signposting, signs and symptoms, and a bit of other stuff. But something like that can be fun, it can be engaging, it can, and once you've got that conversation going, then that's the big thing, is just to get people speaking. And then usually when you get people speaking, and then you get people with that commonality, rapport quickly builds, and then people, it's just it becomes natural for people just start getting stuff off their chest and they start sharing. So peer support and lived experience for me is absolutely massive. Doesn't need to be money spent on it, and is stuff that you can do tomorrow. Just ensure your safeguarding procedures and confidentiality is all squared away on that. And then the only other thing would be to fully understand what the problems are. You know, I've seen too often when I've done training and consultancy work where they've assumed what the problems were, and actually when I dug down deep and I spoke to all the staff, and I built up a much bigger picture, which was a polar opposite to where the management thought it was. So try include all the staff, include them in it. You know, if you're doing surveys, feedback the results to them so they feel included in it, get them engaged, and ask them what they would like to see. Doesn't mean you're going to do it all, but it's that inclusive environment and getting people involved. They're really 2 quick, easy steps that you can do yourselves very quickly and easily, which doesn't cost any money and yet can have really big impacts.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Nick. We're getting a bit of agreement with you in the chat as well, so very practical advice there. Sally, is there any example in particular that you think is most worth highlighting?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to keep building on this. It doesn't cost you any money. Practical things you can do without spending lots and lots of money. The first thing I would say is make it normal and okay to be able to come into work or admit when you're at work, I can't do this today. I'm exhausted, I'm tired, my brain's not in it. Make it normal to take a mental health day or half a day. Make it normal to leave work at the end of the day within the hours you are paid for, rather than always working overtime, working through your lunch break, not taking leave. I know people are concerned, for example, about the 4-day week and whether people get all their work done in a compressed amount of time. But as far as I understand it, and do correct me if I'm wrong, guys, where they've done this in other countries, people are actually more productive when they take more time off. Because otherwise we might not realize we're doing the presenteeism thing. But if your brain's tired, if you're very stressed about something, if you're very anxious about something, if you're feeling depressed, you're not productive. Everything takes longer. You're more likely to, you know, to make mistakes. You're more likely to have physical injuries. You're going to, you know, go on to the other side of health and safety and impact yourself that way. And we've got these stats about, you know, how many, what is it, 760,000 people a year dying from overwork. So heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, that kind of physical effect. So let's make it normal to say, I need a day off. I'm tired, because in the long run, you're going to avoid burnout. You're going to avoid those heart attacks, those serious physical injuries that can happen when somebody's just not coping very well. So that would be the key thing I'd encourage everybody to do, which doesn't cost lots of money. It will save you money in the long run.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sally. And I am conscious of time. We are rapidly approaching the end of our webinar. We've got 25 minutes to go. And there are a few more points that I know we definitely want to touch on. So we'll move on to the next discussion question, which
Can I just make a very important point? I think
yes, go ahead,
on what we can do. I think I completely agree with what both Nick and Sally have said, and I think just building on that, I think two key things I think which are hugely important when we think about what organizations need to do. I think the first thing is this is sort of an area which work has been happening for at least for the last 30 years, and traditionally what organizations have said is, well, if somebody is dealing with something from outside of work, it's not our responsibility as an employer. I think what we've talked about already is that it doesn't matter to a large extent if somebody is not productive at work because of something that's happening outside. It might not be something that you necessarily have control over, but acknowledging that and supporting an individual can help. And so I think the issue about the employer's responsibility is already defined, and the standard provides guidance on that. So that's quite important to highlight. The other point is that I think, as with any management system standard, I think it starts with an assessment. So understanding what the problems are. Nick said it's important to identify what are the key issues, and that does not have to be through a questionnaire necessarily. It could be conversations, and a peer group helps there. And through this discussion, through this assessment of what the key challenges are, what the main the psychosocial hazards are, allows employers to understand what the key issues are, and then develop a plan which they can then implement in terms of actions. And the actions can be dealing with issues at source, so preventing things from happening, focus on the individual in some cases where you'd help develop resilience of individuals, and also what is tertiary or the third level, which is where somebody is affected negatively, how do you rehabilitate them, bring them back into work. So it's basically looking at it in a holistic way, where employers, so you can't just focus on one aspect or just one issue. You have to take a holistic view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, teacher. And on that point, we'll stay with you for a moment as we move on to this next question as well. So we kind of looked at the organisation generally with some examples and considerations. But if we think about individual psychosocial risks, could you maybe explain a little bit about why it is so important to consider the range of risks that might apply to different people in different ways, and also to varying degrees across their careers or their life stages?
So in terms of the first question, does everybody face the same types of psychosocial risk? In many ways, you would face the same type of hazards, but the risk in terms of the psychosocial risk and how it can impact you will vary depending on how you deal with that hazard. So it's the same thing as any traditional health and safety risk, where exposure to a certain hazard does not necessarily determine the same outcome. So that's what's important to keep in mind here. So yes, we are all exposed. So if you're working in a certain work environment, we are all exposed to it. But how that impacts us is going to be different. So the risk is going to vary. And I think diversity and inclusion is hugely critical here, because we've seen there's enough evidence to show that there is a huge difference between male and female employees in terms of gender differences, not just in relation to mental health, generally health and safety as well. Similarly, in relation to minorities, younger workers, older workers. So there is a whole range of issues. So of course, those with disabilities. So there's a whole range of issues which I mean, the literature clearly shows that there's enough evidence to acknowledge the importance of thinking through an assessment, whether formal or ad hoc in many ways, but some form of systematic assessment, which allows an organization to understand how exposure to certain hazards, psychosocial hazards, impacts them, and then take action accordingly. And that, of course, needs to take into account diversity and inclusion. So it's hugely critical.
Thank you very much, teacher. And Nick, if we could go to you to build on that as well. What about different characteristics for people? So how do different characteristics affect people's psychological health or the psychosocial risks they're facing? So, for example, we might know that women have different risks in the workplace, older, younger workers, culture, religion, race. There's so many angles we could we could take or paths we could go down, but if you could just give us an idea.
Yeah, I think Adichie touched on that just there. You know, it's remember that mental health is individual. Remember that all of us are uniquely individual. And so what someone might find traumatic or stressful or upsetting, someone else might experience exactly the same thing and be absolutely fine with it. But then you've also got things like Adichie said there with males, how you approach mental health for males from the age 35, 40 upwards will be completely different to how you engage with males who are 18, 20 upwards, for example. It's a lot harder to get the older guys to open up. Different religions have different views on mental health across the board, so you really need to be aware of religious and also culturally. It might not be the individual themselves, it might be if they're still living with their parents, or if there's a strong family connection there that goes back religiously and culturally, that they can't then go back home and act on what you've kind of told them. So you've really got to be aware of, again, I guess it comes down to that one cap fits all. It just doesn't work, you know. And I think we've talked all the way through this about how it's really important to understand what the issues are, try and understand individually where they're at, and when it comes to case by case, then approach it with you don't fully understand what's going on. You can't make any assumptions or judgments on people, and just be aware that there are such a vast amount of characteristics and other things, variables that at play that can impact people in completely the different ways. The stigmas that tend to come out is, especially in workplaces, is where they then go, well, what do you mean you're stressed or overworked? Well, I can do that, there's nothing wrong with that. Or managers thinking, I can deal with this workload, so therefore you can. It doesn't work that way. But again, for me, this ties back down to knowing your staff and really knowing all of the individuals within your team or whatever else, because then you'll know about their home life, you'll know about what their religions are and what any things might be around that, you know. So it's really key that you build these relationships, because understanding characteristics, recognizing changing characters, understanding all the different elements behind it, so much can be identified by really understanding people and getting to know the people around you.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was a really good answer, and I think a really, really good point and demonstration of how everything that we've talked about today does fit in together. Sally, was there anything that you would like to add on this question?
Yeah, I wanted to build on what Nick was saying, because I think I can almost hear some of the attendees going, what if you've got 10,000 employees? How am I meant to get to know them all? And you know, reasonable question, not a bad question, but it comes back to that worker participation piece that we were talking about before. Decisions, conversations, they need to be had at all levels of the organisation so that there's proper interaction. You can break it into chunks. You don't have to deal with all 10,000 people yourself. It's, you know, everybody works with people in some degree or another. And I just wanted to stress the importance of worker representation here, because particularly if you're in a big organisation and there is a top management team who are putting things in place, if those people all look and sound the same and all come from a similar background, they aren't going to have a clue about those different challenges that are going on in the organisation. And it doesn't have to be a minority group that's poorly impacted here. We've known of examples where there is a male leadership team and a wholly female workforce, and the strategies just aren't working for them because they have different issues than those that the top management thought they had. They meant well, but they didn't quite get it. And it's the same if there's, you know, minority cultural or religious groups or people with physical disabilities are going to have different set of needs. So representation is just absolutely crucial, and it doesn't have to be 10,000 individual interventions. It's that awareness of where the pressure might be coming from. For example, just, you know, you've got a 52% female workforce and half of those have young children or caring responsibilities for elderly parents. That caring is going to fall on them most of the time and not the men in the organisation. You need to make allowances for that. They will give it you back. They'll give it you back 1000% if you're loyal to them and support them when they need that support. But if you don't recognise it, it's going to be a problem. I'll shut up now.
Thank you very much for that answer, Sally. That was great. And we, as we have seen today, we always have so much to say on this topic, but we do have to stop at some point. But if we go on to the next slide for the moment, which is bringing us to a conclusion with some practical tips for those who have tuned in today to take away. So in a moment, I am going to ask each of our panelists to give us one actionable tip that everyone can take away. So one thing that everyone can do right away to help support psychological health and wellbeing in the workplace. I'll give them a moment to think about it. And while they do, I will just note that we have had some really great questions coming in while we've been chatting today. Aditya already had answered one about isolation earlier, as we noted. And there was also a good one about pressures on employees from the 4-day work week, which Sally has answered as well. And I think we will probably have time for 2 questions after we get our action points. So if we go on to the next slide and we'll bring that question up. So Sally, if we could start with you, you're at the top of my list. So one actionable point that the listeners can take away.
Talk to each other and listen to each other, and start today. Don't wait until you've got perfect systems in place and you've dealt with the fact that there's work overload or poor shift patterns or anything like that. Start by talking and listening, and recognise that small interventions that keep building on each other are going to make a difference.
Thank you, Sally. And Aditya?
I think read the standard. ISO 45000 is one of the freely available standards, and I think we didn't know when we were developing the standard that it would be made to read for free, and I think that's just I think it just highlights so nicely that ISO believes in the value of the standard, not just from a business perspective, but I think from a perspective that actually it helps organizations and helps people working in organizations. So do read the standard. It's out there for free. It'll help answer a lot of the questions that have been posed.
Thank you very much, Aditya. And Nick?
I would say trying to find some champions. I just thought on that, what Sally said, you know, people thinking of big workforces. If you get champions and start some form of peer support groups, because that can be put into place like very, very quickly at no cost. Find out those who've got lived experiences, who are in a safe place now, not someone who's still going recovery. Don't, you know, trying to get them overly involved and put more pressure, but people who've got lived experience are in a safe place now. See if they want to get involved in being a champion or kind of facilitating a peer support group, because a peer support group literally can, the stuff we got back from guys, that it helped them, literally that first one session helped a lot of them to put some stuff into perspective. So that's not always going to happen on every case, obviously, but I'd say a good 80% of the guys that came through us got something out that first session straight away. So it can really help, and I would say to try look at getting that put into place as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Really, really great actionable tips there from everyone. And we will definitely take one question and we'll squeeze in 2 if we can. So if we could just go on to the next slide. one of the questions that came through, I might direct this to Nick first, because you did touch on it towards the beginning of the webinar. And the question is, do you think companies need to reevaluate their sick leave policies to align with the current situation? For example, these illnesses are usually a longer duration, but the company might have a short sick leave policy. In other words, 10 days before moving into statutory sick pay. And this may put added pressure on people returning to work before they're ready. So the question was, do you think that companies need to reevaluate their sick leave policies?
Wow, that was me thinking it'd be a nice easy one. Yes, I do. I do think that it needs to be looked at. I think Aditya also followed on with the return to work process. A lot of it is set up for physical injuries and stuff. So it needs to be a lot more staged and a lot more kind of hand holding on the way back in. So I think the whole process from making a decision on if someone's going to be going sick, because actually it might not be the best thing for them. I struggle massively with isolation and loneliness. So sending me back home and forcing me to be off sick, not only would really frustrate me because you're thinking that you know what's best for me without even speaking to me, that would really annoy me, but also the fact that you're forcing me to be at home where I am alone and I'm away from my work colleagues, that can have the complete opposite effect. So really look, and we've shown how flexible we can be. So like Sally said before, there's not much reason why in most places they can't have some kind of flexible working, and that way also it means that you still get them being productive. They're still helping you with your work in the workplace. It's also given that individual a sense of purpose still, and when someone is struggling in the darkness, believe me, hope goes out the window. And if you don't even have a sense of purpose or any kind of meaning, then again, that's going to prevent you from getting up every day and being motivated and wanting to recover and doing all the exercises that you need to do. So yes, it does need to be looked at, but not just that 10-day. It needs to be from HR looking at the intervention and keeping the individual involved at all points, and actually looking at whether they need to be on the sick at all. Flexi working, what they're going to do, come to an agreement, and then if it's really difficult, isn't it, because mental illness is so varied and individual, but if you think about moderate depression, the average amount of sessions is 26 sessions on average for someone with mild to moderate depression, and you usually get one session a week, so that's 26 weeks. So I'm not saying they should be off for that amount of time. I'm just saying be realistic when you are writing these things, because of the amount of time it can take somebody to go through all the therapy.
Thank you very much, Nick. Aditya, did you want to come in on that question as well?
No, I think Nick covered it quite well. I think the bottom line, I think, is you can't think of an issue here just from the perspective of one policy. I think it's an interaction of different policies, and I think the way Nick illustrated that, I think, really shows that you have to look at, it's not just sickness absence, it's how you look at sort of your return to work policy, your assessment of workability, and not just necessarily relying on the GP alone. I think it's all part of that. I think is important. So it's in a way it requires us to rethink things. A lot of things around sickness absence, return to work, etc., as Nick said again, has been done from a physical illness point of view, and this is not the same thing. And so thinking of the interactions, I mean, I think where does the responsibility lie? Is it HR dealing with these things? Is it the health and safety department dealing with these things? I think that's another thing large organizations particularly have to resolve, because it's fascinating. So in the UK, HR has to deal with bullying cases because HSE does not. But if you saw in the table, bullying and violence at work is part of the psychosocial hazards. So there needs to be agreement. There needs to be, we can't just have policies which are not linked to other policies, and unfortunately we have that siloed approach to some extent. So dealing with that is quite important here.
And also, don't forget the part of the recovery journey. Your employer could actually be part of that recovery journey, because it has to be holistic. It has to be a 360 thing. So it's not we'll send them home and they'll go off and see therapists and they'll be fixed over here. And actually, they should be in the centre, and then the GP, the therapist, the employer, family, all of these should be kind of all within. And that's the best way for it to go forward.
Can I just jump in as well, Lockie? Sorry.
Yeah, no.
The organisation also has to take responsibility for their part in what made that person ill, and make those changes so that they're not returning somebody to a stressful, difficult, dangerous, unhealthy environment again. So if it's about the way work is organised, there is a bullying culture that is not properly dealt with, anything like that, work has got to take their part in this recovery, so really seriously.
Yeah, thank you all very much for those answers. There is one more question that's come in that I think is really interesting, and I think we've got time to quickly address it. But it picks up on when we spoke earlier about legal requirements and changing regulation. And the question is, should businesses employ a psychologist or someone from the psychiatrist profession, as is the case with health and safety and environment law professionals? So I guess that is around how many businesses will have someone looking after the health and safety of the company. So should they also be employing someone on this side of things? So could we start with a teacher?
Yeah, so I think the answer is no, you don't need to. I think as Sally said at the outset, I think you don't need to be a psychologist to deal with. So basically what we need as organizations to do to protect and promote mental health at work is to create healthy environments or promote or deal with managed psychosocial risk. And if you look at that table, I think so some of the examples, or if you go back to the standard and you see the tables in the standard, you don't need to be a psychologist to identify what is the right level, what is work, how do you manage workload, how do you provide the right equipment, and so on and so forth. So it's not, the key responsibility for this, to a large extent, lies with the line manager. I think a lot of what Nick said about developing peer groups, understanding. So in a large organization, if you're 10,000 people, you have line managers dealing with small teams. And I think that's where the story starts to a large extent. Line managers have a huge role to play in promoting mental health at work. So then they're not always trained for that, but there is a lot of good guidance within the standard and in the UK provided by the regulator. So HSE has a lot of good guidance on this. If you just on Google type HSE line manager stress, there's guidance, detailed guidance on that. That will be very helpful. The standard itself, as I said, has a lot of information. So the answer is no. In fact, if you appoint a mental health first aider or a specialist, you often are delegating responsibility. You're saying they'll deal with the problem rather than actually dealing with the problem by those who actually have to deal with the problem. So the answer is no, and I think it's important to recognize who's responsible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aditya. Sally, do you want to add to that at all?
Just in as much as don't put it all on the line manager. Yes, line managers do have a huge part to play in this, but ultimately this is most senior decision makers need to take action to make sure the way they manage their organization is not making people ill. So you're not expecting people to actually do 2 people's work while you're only paying them half a person's salary. I mean, that's never going to work. So yes, line managers are important, but top management have even greater responsibility. Otherwise, your line managers are going off sick too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it starts with the line manager, but it can't happen without support from leadership of the organization. Absolutely.
And Aditya said it there, which I'll just back up. It's Sally knows it's one of my frustrations, is around that was focused on psychiatrist type level. But Aditya said with mental health first aiders, this is not a reason to then train up your mental health first aiders and then expect them to deal with all of the stuff. counsellors have 4 years worth of training and have to have a monthly decompression appointment with their supervisor before they can do that side of stuff. So MHFA is good and as an awareness and as a signposting tool, but don't expect to get someone to do a 2-day course and then suddenly they're dealing with people's huge problems. That's being used in the wrong way.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was a really good kind of final thought to finish on, I think, as well. And thank you all for the answer to that question. We do have to finish up now. It's 5 o'clock. So just to very, very quickly note, we've got some links here. If you do want to find out more about 45001 and the related standards, do visit the BSI website. My contact details are also on this slide, so please do get in touch with me if you're interested in standards development. Very, very welcome to get in touch. And if we just go to the final slide, I'd just like to say a very, very big thank you to our 3 panelists for sharing so many insights and so many thoughts today. It's been a great discussion and a really, really good final webinar for the day. And just a reminder again that we do send around an event survey after this, so please do fill it in. Feedback very, very welcome. And thank you everyone for attending.